England in 878 was not a united kingdom. It was not a land of stone castles, of shining knights, or of one English crown. Much of it had already fallen. The north was in Danish hands. East Anglia had been conquered. Mercia was broken. And in the south, Wessex, the last great Saxon kingdom, was almost destroyed. For a single, terrifying winter, it seemed that Guthram, not Alfred, might decide the future of England. This is not the story of Alfred defeating a Viking. This is the story of what England looked like when the Viking world almost became its future, of farmers who woke up one morning and found that the men who ruled them no longer spoke their language, of villages where the old gods walked back into the daylight, of kings who hid in marshes and kings who sailed across the sea, looking not just for plunder, but for land. To understand Guthram's England, we cannot begin with kings. We have to begin with the people who woke up one morning and discovered that the world around them had changed. This is what England was really like under Guthram in the year 878. We often imagine the England of the 9th century as one place with one people, one tongue, and one faith. That is a mistake. In 878, there was no country called England in the sense we understand it. There were kingdoms, there were borders that shifted with every campaign season. There were old Roman roads still cutting across the countryside, used now by farmers, monks, and armies that travelled them for very different reasons. The land was a patchwork of small worlds. A man in Kent might live and die without ever seeing a man from Northumbria. The kingdoms had their own coins, their own laws, their own quiet rivalries, but by 878 all of that had been shaken to its foundations. For nearly a century, ships had been arriving from the north. At first, they came in small numbers. A monastery raided here, a village burned there. Coastal communities learned to fear summer. Children learned the word Northmen before they learned the names of distant kings. Then, in the middle of the century, something changed. The raiders stopped going home. They began to spend the winter in England. They built fortified camps. They brought more men. They brought horses. The old hit-and-run wars gave way to something colder, more patient, and far more dangerous. By the 860s, what the Saxons would later call the Great Heathen Army had landed on the eastern shore. It was a coalition. A loose, shifting army of Danes, of men from across the Scandinavian world, bound together by leadership, by ambition, and by the simple fact that England was wealthy, divided, and ready to fall. Northumbria fell first. In 866, the great northern kingdom was torn open. Its kings died fighting in the streets of York. The old royal house was destroyed. The Danes turned the most ancient Christian kingdom of the north into a Danish base. The monastery at Lindisfarne, where holy men had once illuminated manuscripts in gold and ink, was now a memory in a country whose lords drank from cups taken from Saxon halls. East Anglia fell next. King Edmund, who would later be remembered as a saint and martyr, was killed in 869. The chronicles tell us that he refused to deny his faith and was shot through with arrows. East Anglia, the kingdom of the East Angles, had fallen under Danish power. Mercia, the great Middle Kingdom, was the next to crack. For generations, Mercia had been the dominant power in central England. Its kings had once made and unmade other rulers, but the Danes pressed against it from the north and east, and Mercia could not hold. By the mid-870s, large parts of Mercia were occupied or paying tribute. Its king, Burgred, abandoned his throne and fled to Rome. A new ruler was placed on what was left of the Mercian throne, but everyone understood that he sat there only as long as the Danes allowed it. That left Wessex. Only Wessex, the southern kingdom ruled by the House of Cerdic, was now the last great Saxon kingdom still standing on its own feet. It was wealthy, it was well organized, but it was also surrounded. To the north, Mercia was crumbling. To the east, East Anglia was lost. To the northeast, Northumbria was a Danish stronghold. Wessex was an island of Saxon kingship in a sea that was rising fast. For the people who actually lived through this, the maps in our history books mean very little. They did not see England as colours on a chart. They saw something far simpler and far more terrifying. For ordinary people, conquest did not arrive as a map-changing colour. It arrived as strange voices in the market, new lords in old halls, and the terrifying question of who now owned the land beneath their feet. It arrived as a procession of armed men down a familiar road, as a winter when the rents went to a different hall, as a new face at the high seat in the local feast, as a priest who suddenly preached more carefully, choosing his words, as a cousin who never came back from a season's fighting, as a sister who married a man whose mother had crossed the sea. This was the England that Guthram entered, a country of broken kings, half-conquered shires, frightened villages, ruined monasteries, and a single, surviving Saxon kingdom. A country where the future was being written not by chroniclers in distant cells, but by the boots of men marching down old Roman roads. It is tempting when we hear the name Guthram to picture a man with a sword in his hand, a horned helmet on his head, and fire behind him. That is not history, that is theatre. Guthram was real. He was a king among the Danes, one of several leaders of that great army that had been moving across England since the 860s. By the mid-870s, he is already a man of significant authority. He commands warriors. He shares the leadership of campaigns. He is, in every meaningful sense, a king without a kingdom yet, looking for one. The Danes who followed him were not all alike. Some had crossed from Denmark itself, others had come from southern Norway or from communities that had already settled in Frisia or Ireland. Some were the sons of men who had raided the English coast a generation earlier. Some had grown up in camps in northern England, eating Saxon bread, learning a few words of Saxon speech. What held them together was not nationality, it was leadership, loyalty, and shared ambition. These were warriors, yes, but they were not only warriors. They were also farmers, smiths, traders, sailors, herdsmen. Many had families waiting in homelands where land was scarce and inheritance was bitter. A second son in a Danish farmstead might inherit nothing. But across the sea in this rich, fragmented island, a determined man could win not only treasure, but acres, enough to feed a household, enough to pass to his own sons, enough to become the kind of man other men followed. This is the crucial difference between the early raids and the world of Guthram. The early Vikings came for plunder. They came for silver, for slaves, for prestige. They came expecting to leave. The army Guthram led was something newer and more dangerous. It came expecting to stay. By the time Guthram had become one of its principal leaders, the Danish host had spent years moving through England. They had taken winter quarters at Reading, at Repton, at Cambridge, at places whose names still mark the long memory of those campaigns. They had used the great rivers as their highways, sailing in the long, shallow ships that could carry men inland to places no Saxon king had ever expected an enemy fleet to reach. They had also begun to break apart in a very telling way. A portion of the army around 876 had taken land in Northumbria. They had stopped fighting and started ploughing. The chroniclers note this almost casually, but it is one of the most important sentences in the entire 9th century. It tells us that the army had reached the point where some of its members no longer wanted war, they wanted homes. Guthram was the leader of those who still wanted more, those who still believed that the war was not finished, those who still looked at the map of England and saw in the south a kingdom that had not yet bent the knee. In 875 and 876, his forces moved south. They reached Wareham, they reached Exeter. They tested Alfred, the young king of Wessex, in skirmish after skirmish. They made oaths and broke them. They negotiated and slipped away. Alfred bought peace with silver, and the Danes accepted the silver and then came back for more. By the autumn of 877, Guthram had returned to Gloucester. Mercia was carved up under his oversight, and then, with the harvest gathered, And the fields quiet, the king of the Danes prepared one more campaign. He would not wait for spring. He would not give Alfred time to muster his men. He would not respect the old, half-spoken rule of medieval war that says winter is for hearths, not battles. In the depth of January 878, Guthram struck. The target was Chippenham, a royal estate in the heart of Wessex. Alfred himself was there, marking the Christmas season with his household. The attack was sudden, brutal, and devastating. Saxon nobles were killed or scattered. Alfred barely escaped with his life. Most of his thegns either submitted or fled into hiding or fell on the road. For a few weeks, perhaps even months, Guthram was effectively the strongest man in southern England. The last Saxon kingdom had been gutted in the middle of winter. Its king was a fugitive in his own land. Its people did not know if there was still a kingdom at all. What does it mean now when we say the king? To understand what England was really like under Guthram, we have to leave the kings and the chronicles for a while and step into the places where most people actually lived. The villages, the small farms, the market towns, the river crossings, the places where life did not stop when armies moved because life could not afford to stop. Most English people in 878 did not own land. They worked it, they ploughed it, they paid for the right to live on it, in labour, in grain, in animals, in service. Their world was bounded by a few miles. They knew their lord, their priest, their neighbours, their fields, and their river. Beyond that, the kingdom was a rumour. When Danish power reached into a region, that rumour suddenly came in through the door. In some places, conquest was savage. Halls were burned, lords were killed, churches were stripped of silver, slaves were taken, whole villages were emptied or scattered. There is no point pretending otherwise. People died, families were broken, land was taken, but conquest was not always like that. And this is what makes the world of Guthram so much more interesting than the simple picture in our heads. In some places, conquest meant terror. In others, it meant marriage, trade, bargaining, new laws, new names, and a slow mixing of two worlds that had once met only through violence. A village in eastern Mercia might find that its old Saxon lord had been killed or had simply disappeared, replaced by a Danish warrior who had been granted the estate by his commander. He would need food, shelter, labourers, and trust. He could not run the estate by terror alone. Sooner or later, he had to sit down and learn the names of the men who farmed his land. The villagers, in turn, had to make a brutal calculation. They could resist and most likely die. They could flee and become wanderers without rights or fields, or they could stay, work, pay, and adjust. Most chose the third path. It was not heroism, but it was survival, and survival is the truest history of the medieval poor. So a strange new normality grew up in the Danish-held parts of England. Old Saxon names sat next to new Norse ones. A field might still be called by the name an English grandmother had used, while the man who claimed the rent was called Thorkel, or Sigurd, or Ulf. Markets were busier because Danish settlers had connections far away to traders who came up the rivers from the sea. Language itself changed. Slowly, almost without anyone noticing, English speakers began to absorb Norse words. Words for everyday life, words for parts of the plough, for kinds of land, for legal arrangements, for ways of speaking to one another. The English we speak now still carries the breath of those Danes in its bones. The law changed too. In areas of strong Danish settlement, customs began to follow Scandinavian models in matters of inheritance, in the assemblies that judged disputes, in the way certain crimes were punished. The phrase that later writers would use for this region of mixed law and custom, the Danelaw, was not yet a real political term in 878, but the conditions for it were already growing in the soil. For a Saxon priest, this was a profoundly disturbing world. Many of his old patrons were gone. Some of the new lords were pagans. They might tolerate his church. They might also use it as a barn. A priest's life under Danish power was a constant, careful negotiation. For a Saxon woman, the changes could be even more intimate. Marriages cut across the line between conqueror and conquered far more often than later legends would admit. Children grew up speaking two languages, hearing two sets of stories, praying perhaps to one god in the day, and hearing about another by the fire at night. Conquest did not always look like fire. Sometimes it looked like a new lord sitting in the same old hall. Let us step closer. Imagine a Saxon farmer in East Anglia. He has no name in any chronicle, he never will. The men who write history are not interested in him. But he is the truest witness to this age because he is the one who actually lives it day after day, year after year. He wakes before the sun. The hall, if you can call it that, is a single long room of timber and thatch, smoke darkened from years of fire. His wife is already moving. The fire is being built up from the night's embers. The child, the one who survived the last winter, is curled beneath a cloak. He goes outside. The sky over the flat country is grey. There is a thin frost on the grass, and the breath of the cattle is white in the cold. His father had farmed this same strip of land. He had worked for a Saxon thegn, a man who came once or twice a year, took his share of grain and livestock, judged the small disputes of the village, and rode away. The thegn was not a friend, but he was understandable. He spoke the same language. He prayed in the same church. Now things are different. The thegn is gone. He died or fled, or simply faded out of the records of the village. In his place there is another man, a Dane. He took the hall on the rise above the village. He drinks from old Saxon cups and wears a brooch that the farmer's grandmother would have recognized at once as Scandinavian work. He speaks a tongue the farmer does not really understand, although every season more of its words slip into the speech of the village. The farmer feeds the animals. He goes out to the field. He works the soil. The work has not changed. The plough is the plough his father used. The seed is the seed that has always been sown. The earth does not care who collects the rent, but there are new sights on the road. Once a month, perhaps, a group of armed men passes by. Some are Saxons in service to the new Danish lord. Some are Danes themselves. They are not friendly, but they are also not cruel without cause. They want order, because order means rents, and rents mean wealth. He goes to the church on Sundays when there is a priest. The Mass is in Latin, as it has always been, but the priest no longer speaks easily about kings. He no longer prays loudly for the man who once sat on the throne. He prays for peace. He prays for the land. He prays for the people. The names he uses are careful. There is no longer a clear answer to the simple question, who is my king? The kings the farmer knew are dead. The king of his land is, in some sense, the man on the rise in the new hall, and behind that man is another man, somewhere further off, called Guthrum. The farmer has never seen Guthrum. He may never see him, but the name is in the air. It comes into the village in rumours. It is spoken at the market. Guthrum in Cambridge, Guthrum in Gloucester, Guthrum moving against the king in the south. And then in the heart of winter, the rumour changes. Guthrum has struck Wessex itself. The southern kingdom is breaking. Alfred is in hiding. The last Saxon kingdom is on the edge. The farmer hears this and does not know what to feel. He is a Saxon. His grandfather was a Saxon. His prayers are Saxon prayers. In one sense, the news from the south is the death of his world. If Wessex falls, then no Saxon king will sit anywhere on this island. There will be only Danes and Danes' men. But his life, day by day, is no longer ruled by a Saxon king. It is ruled by the man on the rise, by the road, by the seasons, by the rents. The fall of Wessex would not change the wheat that grows in his strip of field, nor the milk his cow gives, nor the small daily tyranny of weather and want. So he goes back to his work. He carries the wood. He mends the wall. He listens to the strange news from the south as he listens to a story told by travellers, knowing that whatever happens, It will reach his door eventually in some changed form, and he will have to deal with it then. This is what England was really like under Guthrum for most of the people who actually lived in it. Not a battlefield, not a courtly drama, but a long, watchful, exhausted attempt to keep a household alive in a country whose owners had changed. Now turn the camera the other way. Look at the same village, the same hall, the same field, but through a different pair of eyes. A Danish warrior stands at the door of the hall on the rise. He is perhaps 30 years old. He has been fighting in one army or another since he was 16. He has crossed the sea more times than he can count. He has slept in tents, in ditches, in burnt-out monasteries, in the shelter of upturned ships. He has killed men and he has buried friends. He has more silver in a small chest than his father ever saw in a lifetime, and he has deeper scars than his father ever earned in any honest work. He is one of Guthram's men, but this morning he is not at war. He is standing at the door of a hall that a year ago belonged to a Saxon thegn. The thegn is dead. The hall now belongs to him by gift of his commander, by the right of the spear, by the rough justice of the army that has redistributed the wealth of the conquered. He never imagined this when he was 16. When he first sailed, he had thought of it as a season's work, a summer of fighting, a return home with silver and a story. But the seasons had stretched into years. Friends had died, leaders had risen and fallen, and somewhere in the long winters of the camps he had stopped thinking of home as the place he had left. Home was now wherever the army was, and the army was now increasingly here. Guthrum had spoken of this in the long meetings of the leaders. Land, settlement, a future. Some of the older men did not like it. They preferred the old way: fight, plunder, sail home. They did not trust this new dream of becoming farmers in a foreign country. But the warrior at the door this morning has decided to stay. He has a Saxon woman in the hall behind him. They were married, or as good as married, in the late autumn. Her family did not love this match, but they did not refuse it. To refuse would have been to lose more than they had already lost. There is a child on the way by the spring, and that child will not be entirely Dane and not entirely Saxon. That child will be something new, a small, living example of what is happening to this country. He talks to the men in the village, at first in broken phrases. They are not friends, they are not equals, but they are every day more entangled. He still goes to the gatherings of his commander when called. He still wears his sword to the assembly. He still calls himself a warrior. He still answers in his heart to Guthrum. But when he comes home after a long ride and sees the smoke of the hall and hears the cattle in the byre and sees the woman waiting at the door, he understands that something in him has changed. He came here to take. He is now beginning, almost without noticing, to belong. The same man who once crossed the sea with a spear in his hand might now be measuring fields, repairing a roof, bargaining for cattle, and wondering whether this wet foreign land could become home. This is the great quiet truth of the year 878. The Danes who came with Guthrum did not only change England. England slowly was changing them. Now we have to return to the great events, because in this single year, more than in almost any other in this century, the future of England was decided in battle, in flight, and in negotiation. January 878. The cold was bitter, the roads were hard. Most armies in this age did not move in winter. Horses suffered, men froze in their tents. Supply was almost impossible. Winter was when armies returned to halls, to wives, to drink. Guthrum did not respect that. His attack on Chippenham was by any measure a masterstroke. Alfred was there with a small household, expecting nothing. The royal estate was unprepared. The Danes struck, and the blow was crushing. Alfred's court was scattered. Some of his nobles were killed. Others were captured or forced to submit. The king himself escaped, but only just, and only with a handful of men. This was not a battle. This was a decapitation. Wessex, the last great Saxon kingdom, had effectively been beheaded in the middle of winter, and in the weeks that followed, much of Wessex submitted. Many of the king's men accepted Guthrum. Some made peace, some changed sides, some simply stayed quiet on their estates and waited to see what would happen. The kingdom did not rise as one to defend its king. It could not. There was no king to rally to. There was a fugitive somewhere in the marshes of Somerset, and no one was sure he would ever come back. This is the moment that should not be forgotten when we talk about Guthrum. For a brief, freezing season he was, in effect, the most powerful man south of the Humber. He had broken Mercia, he had broken East Anglia, Northumbria had fallen long before, and now he had broken the back of Wessex. If Wessex did not recover, England, as the Saxons had known it, was over. Alfred, meanwhile, did not give up. He retreated into the wetlands of Athelney in the heart of Somerset. The marshes were cold, treacherous, and almost impossible for an army to penetrate. From this small island of dry land in a sea of reeds, the King of Wessex began, slowly, to gather what was left of his power. Messengers were sent out, loyal thanes were summoned, a small fortress was built, raids were carried out against Danish outposts. Alfred was a king reduced almost to a hidden guest in his own country, and he was using every day of that hiding to plan a return. The plan came to fruition in the spring. By May 878, Alfred had assembled a host. The Firds of Somerset, of Wiltshire, of Hampshire came to his standard. The men who had not submitted, who had not fled, came out of their estates to follow him. The army was not large by later standards, but it was real, and it was loyal, and it was ready. They marched against Guthrum. The two forces met at a place called Edington, in the chalk country of Wiltshire. The chronicler tells us little of the details, but we can imagine it. A long, tight Saxon shield wall, a long, tight Danish shield wall, spears thrust over the top, axes hewing down, men shouting, slipping, falling. The fight at Edington was not a duel of heroes. It was a hard, brutal infantry battle, and at the end of it, the Saxons had won. Guthrum's army broke. They fled back to their fortified camp, perhaps at Chippenham itself. Alfred followed. He surrounded the camp. He cut off the supplies. He waited. For 2 weeks, the Danes inside the camp held out. They had food, water, and walls, but they did not have hope. No relief was coming. The other Danish leaders in East Anglia, in Northumbria, were not coming to save Guthrum. Many of them had already settled into their lands and were not eager to throw away a peace they had spent years building. Inside the camp, hunger began. Discipline cracked. The warriors had to face a hard truth. The war for England was lost. Not the war for everything, but the war that Guthrum had been fighting, the war to break Wessex, the war to be the king of all the Saxons. That war was over. Guthrum, the fierce, patient, winter-striking king of the Danes, did the unthinkable. He asked for terms. He sent envoys to Alfred. He offered hostages. He agreed to leave Wessex. He agreed to stay out of it. And then, in the most extraordinary clause of the agreement, he agreed to something more. He agreed to be baptized. It is one of the strangest scenes in the entire 9th century. A scene that no novelist would dare to invent because it would seem too neat, too symbolic, too much like the perfect ending of a story. And yet it really happened. A few weeks after the surrender, Guthrum and a small group of his leading men, perhaps 30 in number, came to a place called Aller, near Athelney in Somerset. The place is small, it is unremarkable. It is not the kind of place where empires are usually changed. But here, in early summer, 878, something happened that would echo through everything that came after. Guthrum was baptized, the water was poured, the words were spoken. The pagan king of the Danes, the man who had crushed Mercia, conquered East Anglia, and almost destroyed Wessex, stood beneath the hands of Saxon priests. Behind him, his men watched in silence. Some of them were already Christian, in name at least. Others were not and would never be in their hearts. But on this day, in this place, they all stood and watched their king bow. Alfred stood there too. He stood not as a victor, not as an executioner, but as a sponsor, as a godfather. The man whose kingdom Guthram had tried to destroy was now standing as a spiritual father at his baptism, and Guthram was given a new name, a Saxon name, Ethelstan. Try for a moment to imagine the silence in that ceremony. A Danish king, a man whose entire identity had been built on the strength of his arm, on the obedience of his men, on the favor of gods who lived above the cold northern sea, now stood in a ritual that was not his. He spoke words that did not belong to his ancestors. He took a name that had once belonged to enemies of his people. The Danes around him had to watch this and accept it. The Saxons around him had to watch it and trust it. This was not just a religious moment. It was a political earthquake. For Guthram, it was a public submission, but also a public survival. A pagan war leader who refused such a peace might have been killed on the spot. By becoming a Christian king, Guthram became, in Alfred's eyes, a kind of legitimate ruler, no longer simply a heathen invader. Christian kings could make treaties, they could have borders respected, they could rule, in the eyes of the wider Christian world, by something more than the sword. For Alfred, it was a brilliant act of statecraft. He could not destroy Guthram's army. He had won the battle, but he did not have the strength to chase them across England, to root out every Danish settlement. What he could do was bind Guthram in a Christian ceremony with himself as godfather, and turn an enemy who could never be defeated into a neighbor who could perhaps be lived with. Guthram did not only lose a battle, he crossed a line between two worlds. The man who had come to break Wessex now stood in a Christian ceremony, receiving a Saxon name under the eyes of the king he had failed to destroy. The ceremonies continued for several days. There was a feast at Wedmore. There were exchanges of gifts. There were hostages, oaths, and arrangements. Whatever the precise terms of the agreement that history later called the Treaty of Wedmore, the central reality was clear. Guthram and his men would leave Wessex. They would not attack it again. They would withdraw, eventually, to East Anglia, where Guthram would rule as king, but not as a Viking king of an occupied land, as a Christian king of a settled people. The man who, 6 months before, had been the greatest threat Wessex had ever known, was now its godson and ally. When Guthram returned to East Anglia, he did not return as a conqueror riding into a freshly seized country. He returned as a king coming home. East Anglia had been under Danish power for years already. His men were settled there. His warriors had taken farms. The land had begun, slowly, to reshape itself around the Danish presence. Now, Guthram, baptized, named, and bound to Alfred by treaty, ruled it openly. He minted coins in his Christian name. He recognized the boundaries that had been agreed. He kept, in essence, his side of the bargain. He did not march south again. He did not break the peace. And in this he helped to create something that would shape England for the next 2 centuries. The land that the later writers would call the Danelaw was not, in 878, a single neat region with a clear border. The famous treaty that survives in our records, defining a boundary that ran roughly along the Thames and the old Roman road called Watling Street, was probably signed a few years later. In 878 itself, the lines were rougher, more practical, more lived in than legal, but the principle was there. Wessex would be one zone. The Danish settled lands in the east and north would be another. Within those Danish settled lands, life slowly took on a particular character. The legal customs were Scandinavian in flavor. Free farmers were unusually numerous, far more so than in the south. The names of villages and farms began to carry the unmistakable marks of Old Norse. Personal names like Sven, Ulf, Thorkel sat next to Saxon names like Lefric, Wulfstan, Edgar. This was not, however, a country apart. The Danelaw was not a separate nation cut off from the rest. Trade flowed in both directions. Marriages crossed the borders. Christian churches grew, sometimes painfully and slowly, even in deeply Scandinavian regions. For ordinary people, the line between Saxon and Dane began to blur. Their grandparents might have remembered the difference clearly. Their parents might have lived it as a tension. They themselves, in the markets, in the fields, might find that the line had become a haze. They were both, they were neither. They were, slowly, something that did not yet have a name. Guthrum did not live to see all of that. He died as Aethelstan, king of East Anglia, in 890. He was buried by the testimony of the chronicles as a Christian king. The man who had once come to destroy Saxon England ended his life as a baptized ruler in a country that he had helped, in a strange way, to remake. But his deeper legacy was not in his own kingship. It was in the quiet villages where Saxon and Dane learned to share a market, in the children who grew up speaking a tongue that was changing under their teeth, in the laws that bent slightly to accommodate two traditions, in the priests who learned to speak gently to men whose grandfathers had come from beyond the sea. Guthrum lost the battle, but the world he helped create did not disappear. There is a question that hangs over this whole story, and it is impossible to ignore. What if Guthrum had won at Edington? What if Alfred, in the spring of 878, had not gathered his men in time? What if the Firds of Wessex had failed to come? What if the Saxon shield wall had cracked first, and not the Danish one? What if, instead of Guthrum kneeling at Allah, it had been Alfred dying in the marshes of Somerset? We will never know with certainty. History is not a science of repeatable experiments, but we can sketch with some care what such a world might have looked like. If Wessex had fallen, there would have been no Saxon kingdom strong enough to push back against Danish power. The southern shires would, eventually, have followed Mercia and East Anglia into Danish settlement. The royal house of Cerdic would have ended in exile or in graves. The schools that Alfred would later found, the careful rebuilding of Saxon learning, would never have happened. The English language might still have survived, but it would have been a tongue without a single political centre. Without a Wessex to anchor it, English might have become a folk speech in the shadow of a Danish ruling class. The very name England itself, the land of the Angles, was something that began to take real political form precisely because there was a surviving Saxon kingship strong enough to imagine it. Without Wessex, without Alfred, that idea might never have crystallized. In other words, the country we call England today is, in part, a creation of the year 878, of the marshes of Athelney, of the field at Edington, of the camp where Guthrum surrendered, of the water at Allah. Take those moments away and the country is unrecognizable. But none of this means that Guthrum is small. This is the mistake that simple stories make. They look at Edington, see Alfred winning, and assume that Guthrum was just the loser. But that is not the truth. Guthrum was the man who almost made the other England real, the Danish England, the England that would have been part of a wider Scandinavian world, looking out across the North Sea to Denmark, to Norway, to the trading towns of the Baltic, rather than across the Channel to the courts of Francia and the cathedrals of Rome. That world did not come to be, but its shadow remained. In the Danelaw, in the names of villages, in the words we still use without thinking, in the legal habits of certain shires, in the bloodlines of countless ordinary families whose Danish ancestors had once followed Guthrum across the sea and stayed. Guthrum did not lose England, he only lost the chance to rule all of it. What he created in the half he kept was permanent enough to change everything that came after. Let us return, one last time, to the village. The Saxon farmer is in his field, the summer is on the land, the wheat is ripening. He has heard, in the months since the cold, the most extraordinary news. Wessex has not fallen. The young King Alfred came out of the marshes. He fought a great battle in Wiltshire and won. He surrounded the Danish camp until the Danes asked for peace. And now, the strangest part of all, the king of the Danes has been baptized. He has taken a Saxon name. He is going to East Anglia, where the farmer's own village stands, and he is going to rule there, not as an invader, but as a Christian king. The farmer does not know what to make of it. He knows that the man on the rise above the village will stay. The plough will still be the plough, the seed will still be the seed, the earth will still ask for its labour. But other things have shifted. There is no more open war between Wessex and the Danes. The threat of the great army marching in autumn or winter, of villages being burned, of men being dragged from halls is, for now, gone. The man on the rise will think more carefully now about how he treats the people in the village. He has a king to answer to. That king has a treaty. The wild, raw violence of a few years ago has been replaced by something more ordered. Not gentle, not just, but more ordered. The priest, when he says Mass on Sunday, prays openly now for King Aethelstan, the king of the East. Angles. It is a strange prayer for a Saxon priest to say, because the man who bears that name was, very recently, the burner of churches, but it is the right prayer in this new world. The Danish warrior in the hall on the rise comes to that Mass sometimes. He stands at the back. He does not understand the Latin, but he stands there with his Saxon wife at his side, and he listens. His son, the one born that spring, will grow up hearing both the bell of the church and the songs of the long winter evenings around the fire, songs of gods who walk under different skies. In Wessex, Alfred is alive. The king is rebuilding. He is fortifying towns. He is gathering scholars. He does not yet know that men will one day call him the Great. He only knows that his kingdom did not fall and that his work has only just begun. And the country between them, the broken, frightened half-Saxon, half-Danish country, is settling into a strange new shape. Guthram did not become King of England. He did not destroy Wessex. He did not erase Alfred from history, but he helped create something just as important, a divided England, a borderland England, an England where Saxon and Dane lived close enough to fear each other, trade with each other, marry each other, and slowly change each other. In 878, the future of England was not clear. It was not yet the England of stone castles, of cathedrals, of parliaments and crowns and empires. It was a land of wooden halls, of muddy roads, of frightened villages, of armed men, of broken kingdoms, and of new borders. It was a land where two peoples who had met first as victims and aggressors were beginning painfully to live together, not as friends, not as equals, but as neighbours. Under Guthram, England was not conquered completely, but it was transformed, and the country that would, generations later, call itself simply England, with one king, one law, and one people, would owe something to that hard, transformative year, something to the marshes of Athelney, something to the field at Edington, something to the silent baptism at Allaire, and something too to the man who came across the sea, broke Wessex in the dead of winter, and then knelt in a Saxon ceremony and took the name of his enemy, the man called Guthram, the man who almost won, the man whose loss was, in its own quiet way, one of the most important victories any people on this island had ever known.